Life after the military hasn't been easy, but I've faced every challenge head-on, just as I did during my 2 tours in Vietnam. The injuries I sustained left me reliant on a wheelchair, but they also instilled in me a deep appreciation for resilience and adaptability. When Kathy, my wife of 35 years, and I decided to move to a new neighborhood, it wasn't just about finding a house. It was about finding a place where we could truly enjoy our retirement years. The house we chose seemed like a dream come true. It had wide hallways, a spacious living area, and a layout that could be easily modified to suit my needs. The neighborhood itself appeared calm and welcoming, with neat lawns and friendly smiles from passers-by. I thought we had finally found a place where we could settle down in peace. One of our first tasks after moving in was ensuring the house was accessible for me. While the interior had enough space for my wheelchair, the front entrance posed a problem. The porch sat a good 2 feet above ground level, with 3 steep steps leading up to the door. Navigating those steps in a wheelchair was out of the question. We hired a local contractor to build a wheelchair ramp. The ramp, constructed from treated pine wood, was sturdy and functional. It extended from the driveway to the front porch, designed to blend with the aesthetics of the house while meeting ADA standards. It was a significant investment, but one Kathy and I deemed essential for my independence. When the work was completed, I felt a sense of relief and gratitude. I could finally move in and out of our home without assistance. Shortly after the ramp was installed, Kathy and I began to meet some of our neighbors. One sunny morning, Kathy was out watering the flower beds we just planted when a woman approached. Her name was Sharon, and she introduced herself as a longtime resident and a member of the HOA. Kathy, always the social butterfly, struck up a conversation with her. I stayed inside, sorting through boxes in the living room, but I could hear snippets of their chat through the open window. Sharon's voice was polite but carried an air of authority. Kathy mentioned the ramp in passing, explaining how it had been a lifesaver for us. Sharon didn't comment much, though I noticed she seemed to linger near the ramp, inspecting it as they talked. At the time, I didn't think much of it, assuming she was just being curious. A few weeks later, an unsettling incident shattered our initial optimism. It was a warm afternoon, and Kathy decided to step outside to check the mail and pick up a package left on the driveway. I was in the kitchen preparing lunch when I heard a sudden, sharp thud followed by Kathy's muffled cry. I rushed out to find her sitting on the ground near the base of the ramp, her face pale and her hands trembling. She had fallen while crossing the ramp, bruising her arms and scraping her knees. The sight of her on the ground filled me with a mix of fear and anger. Once Kathy was safely back inside and resting, I went to inspect the ramp. At first glance, everything seemed normal, but as I ran my hand along the wood, I noticed something was off. One of the planks near the bottom of the ramp was splintered, and a small gap had formed where the ramp met the driveway. This gap was just wide enough to catch the edge of a shoe, a perfect setup for a misstep. That night, as Kathy rested, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with questions. The ramp was new, built by professionals, and had been perfectly solid until now. How could it have been damaged so soon? The ramp wasn't just a convenience. It was my lifeline to the outside world. If it wasn't safe, then neither was I. The following morning, Kathy and I went outside to check on the ramp. I had been uneasy since the previous day, unsure whether it had shifted or if I was just overly sensitive to things breaking down in my life. The fall she'd taken was a reminder of how fragile everything had become. Her safety, my ability to move around, our peace. When we reached the ramp, it was clear something wasn't right. The treated pine wood, which had always served me well, was cracked in several places. Some of the pieces had even come loose, creating gaps large enough that I could see the pavement underneath. The smell of fresh wood was replaced by the unmistakable scent of something not quite right. Kathy stood there for a moment, staring at it, as if trying to understand what had happened. "It wasn't like this yesterday," she said, her voice quiet, filled with disbelief. I knew she was right. A knot twisted in my chest as I looked at the damage. We had worked hard to get it right, making sure it was stable, safe, and accessible. Now, it seemed as though something or someone had sabotaged it. Maybe something drove over it? Kathy suggested, but we both knew it didn't make sense. It was built to withstand more than that. I had a nagging suspicion that this wasn't just wear and tear. The next thing I did was try to get it fixed. I called a few local contractors, hoping to get some repairs underway. But when they quoted me numbers above $400 just to get it patched up, my heart sank. That wasn't just a financial burden, it was an impossible one. I didn't have that kind of money just lying around. Even if I did, it felt wrong to pay it for something that should have never been damaged in the first place. That's when the local Boy Scouts came into the picture. Alan, one of our neighbors who had a young son in the troop, offered to help. The group of scouts and their leader came over one Saturday morning, all eager to lend a hand. They had enough energy and enthusiasm to light up the entire block, and I could tell their parents had instilled a sense of service and community into them. It made me proud to see them working so hard, repairing the ramp, and even extending it by 5 feet to ensure I could navigate it better. The job wasn't perfect, but it was an improvement. The kids worked well under the guidance of their scoutmaster, and I had no doubts that I'd be able to use the ramp with more ease now. As we finished up the repair, Kathy and I couldn't stop thanking them for their help. It wasn't just the physical repair. It was the kindness of the community that had been unexpectedly extended to us. They didn't have to help, but they did. And that meant something. But no good deed goes unnoticed, it seems. As we were finishing up, Sharon, our neighbor and a longtime member of the HOA, drove by in her pristine Cadillac. She slowed as she approached, eyeing the ramp with an air of authority. I didn't know what to expect, but I sure wasn't prepared for what came next. She rolled down her window and handed us a piece of paper, a notice of violation. Kathy took it, but I could already tell by the look on her face that this wasn't good. The notice demanded the removal of the ramp within 30 days, threatening a $50,000 fine unless we complied. The explanation was that the ramp allegedly obstructed the driveway and sidewalk, something I knew wasn't true. The ramp had always been placed carefully so as not to interfere with the flow of traffic or walkways. There were plenty of other homes with similar or even more intrusive modifications, but none of them seemed to receive any complaints. Sharon, this isn't fair, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but I could feel the anger bubbling under the surface. The ramp is essential for my mobility. It's not blocking anything. And we just had it repaired by the scouts, as you can see. Sharon didn't respond to my argument. She didn't even look at me directly as she explained that the HOA had decided that any ramp over a certain length violated the community's aesthetic guidelines. She mentioned that it was an eyesore and was disrupting the uniformity of the neighborhood. It didn't matter to her that I was a disabled veteran who needed the ramp to get around. And it didn't matter that the ramp was built with care, in accordance with both my needs and the space available. All that mattered was the HOA's rules, their arbitrary standards of conformity. Sharon seemed determined to enforce them no matter the cost. As she drove off, I looked at Kathy, both of us in shock. It felt as though the rug had been pulled out from under us, and I couldn't help but wonder, why was Sharon going so hard on us? What had we done to deserve this? The next day, I called Sharon and asked if we could meet to discuss the matter. I was hoping for a simple explanation, perhaps some leniency. After all, we had no intention of breaking any rules. We simply wanted to live in peace. But when we met, things didn't go as I'd hoped. Sharon remained cold, dismissive even. She refused to provide any reasonable justification for the fine or the removal request, offering only vague answers. She insisted that the ramp was too long, that it didn't match the spirit of the neighborhood, and that we were in violation of the HOA guidelines. I asked her, what's the problem with the ramp? It doesn't obstruct the sidewalk, and it's not in the way of anyone's driveway. Why are you targeting us? She didn't offer a valid answer. Instead, she reiterated the fine and mentioned that we could appeal the decision. But given her tone and the lack of explanation, it was clear that her mind was already made up. She was doing this because she could, and maybe because she had been doing it for years, bullying homeowners into compliance. Kathy and I left that meeting frustrated and angry. Sharon's refusal to acknowledge the legitimate purpose of the ramp and her total disregard for our situation made it clear that we couldn't let this slide. It was no longer just about the ramp, it was about standing up for our rights. We decided then and there to take legal action. It was time to draw a line in the sand. The decision to fight back meant taking on the HOA directly, which felt like stepping into unfamiliar and hostile territory. Kathy and I contacted a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes. We needed someone who understood the nuances of HOA regulations and, more importantly, the protections afforded under the Americans with Disabilities Act ADA. The lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense professional, immediately put us at ease. After hearing our story, he leaned back in his chair and nodded. "This is a clear violation of the ADA," he said. "They're targeting you for something that's not just necessary for your mobility but also legally protected. We have a strong case here." He explained that federal law supersedes HOA regulations. The ADA explicitly prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities, including obstructing the installation of accessibility features like wheelchair ramps. Furthermore, Sharon's refusal to provide clear reasoning behind the fine or removal notice added weight to our claim of unfair targeting. The lawyer assured us that we had every right to challenge the HOA's decision. He also suggested that we could file a counterclaim against Sharon personally if we could prove she had acted maliciously or beyond the scope of her authority as an HOA representative. The next big breakthrough came unexpectedly. Alan, our neighbor whose son was part of the Boy Scouts that repaired the ramp, approached me one evening. He mentioned having a security camera that captured footage of the area near our house. Out of curiosity, he decided to review the footage from the night before Kathy's fall. What he found left both of us stunned. The footage showed Sharon walking onto our property under the cover of darkness. She approached the ramp and began tampering with it, using some kind of tool to loosen the screws and shift the planks. Her movements were deliberate and methodical, as if she had done this sort of thing before. The video clearly showed her creating a gap in the ramp that could easily have caused an accident. Alan shared the footage with us, and we immediately took it to our lawyer. Watching it felt surreal. It was one thing to suspect malice, but another to see it confirmed so clearly. Sharon's actions weren't just petty. They were dangerous. Kathy could have been seriously injured or worse because of her sabotage. The lawyer's reaction was swift and decisive. "This changes everything," he said. "We're not just dealing with an HOA fine anymore. This is tampering with private property, reckless endangerment, and potentially fraud. Sharon has crossed a line, and she'll have to answer for it." With the security footage as our ace, we formally filed a counterclaim against Sharon. Our lawyer compiled a case that included the video footage of Sharon tampering with the ramp, testimonies from neighbors who vouched for the ramp's prior condition, documentation of the ramp's necessity for my mobility as a disabled veteran, evidence of the ramp's compliance with ADA standards, showing that it neither blocked the sidewalk nor obstructed traffic. As part of the legal discovery process, our lawyer uncovered a troubling pattern in Sharon's behavior. She had a history of targeting homeowners who made modifications to their properties, particularly those who didn't conform to her vision of the neighborhood. Several neighbors came forward with stories of Sharon harassing them over minor infractions, like the color of their fences or the placement of garden decorations. But what stood out most was the financial trail. Sharon had allegedly struck deals with certain contractors in the past, pushing homeowners to hire her recommended services for inflated prices. While we couldn't prove that this was her motive for targeting us, it painted a clear picture of someone who abused her authority for personal gain. The revelations fueled our resolve to see the case through to the end. This wasn't just about us anymore. It was about standing up to someone who had been a bully for far too long. As the legal battle progressed, the HOA's tactics grew more desperate. They began escalating the fines, raising the total from $50,000 to a staggering $150,000. Letters from the HOA arrived almost daily, each one more threatening than the last. They accused us of being uncooperative, disruptive, and even claimed that the ramp posed a hazard to the neighborhood. Despite their bluster, it was clear that the HOA was crumbling under pressure. Many of the letters came from other members who had no personal stake in the issue. Some even apologized privately, admitting they were pressured by Sharon to support her vendetta. Meanwhile, Sharon became increasingly isolated. Her refusal to engage in meaningful dialogue or address the allegations against her only made matters worse. It was evident that she was losing her grip on the situation. After a long preparation and legal wrangling, the day of the court ruling finally arrived. Kathy and I sat in the courtroom, flanked by our lawyer and Alan, who had come to show his support. Sharon came in looking far less composed than her usual self-assured demeanor. The HOA's legal team doubled down on their claims. They argued that the ramp violated community aesthetics and posed a potential liability. However, their case quickly unraveled under scrutiny. The judge, visibly unimpressed by their arguments, pointed out that their aesthetic concerns were irrelevant in light of federal disability protections. The security footage of Sharon's tampering was the nail in the coffin. When presented in court, it left no room for doubt. Sharon had acted maliciously and recklessly, endangering Kathy's safety and causing property damage. The judge's expression hardened as he reviewed the evidence and began to deliver his verdict. His words were precise and unyielding. The HOA's actions were deemed discriminatory and in direct violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Sharon's tampering with the ramp was ruled as intentional property damage and reckless endangerment, and the evidence against her was overwhelming. I find the actions of the HOA, led by Sharon, to be both illegal and reprehensible, the judge declared. The fines imposed on the plaintiffs were not only baseless but also an attempt to intimidate and harass a disabled veteran and his family. Furthermore, Sharon's deliberate tampering with the ramp constitutes a grave breach of trust and endangerment. The court ordered the HOA to cease all fines and issue a formal apology. Sharon, however, faced much steeper consequences. She was found guilty of fraud, property damage, and reckless endangerment. The judge sentenced her to 3 years in prison, emphasizing the seriousness of her actions. In addition to her sentence, Sharon was ordered to pay restitution for Kathy's medical bills, the ramp repairs, and an additional $20,000 in punitive damages. As the judge banged his gavel, signaling the end of the case, a wave of relief washed over Kathy and me. We had fought back against an injustice and won, not just for ourselves but for anyone who had ever been bullied or silenced by Sharon. The fallout for Sharon was swift and severe. In addition to her prison sentence, she was immediately removed from her position within the HOA. Further investigations into her conduct revealed a long history of unethical behavior and coercion of homeowners. The local news picked up the story, broadcasting Sharon's downfall and highlighting the broader implications of the case. It wasn't just a victory for us but also a warning to HOAs everywhere about the limits of their power. With Sharon gone, the HOA underwent a complete overhaul. A special election was held to appoint new leadership, and this time, the community demanded candidates who prioritized fairness and inclusivity. Alan, along with several other supportive neighbors, played a key role in pushing for reforms. The new HOA leadership implemented policies to ensure greater transparency and respect for homeowners' rights. They also established a committee specifically to address the needs of disabled residents, ensuring that no one would face the kind of discrimination we had endured. Neighbors who had initially sided with Sharon began to approach us with apologies. Some admitted that they had been too afraid to speak out against her, fearing retaliation. While it didn't erase the hurt caused by their silence, it was heartening to see the community rallying together in the aftermath. This experience tested us in ways I never imagined, but it also showed me the strength of my wife, Kathy. For years, I carried the weight of my service and the scars, both visible and invisible, that came with it. I had faced adversaries on the battlefield and in civilian life, but this battle was different. It wasn't fought with weapons or brute force but with determination, evidence, and the law. I'm grateful for the support we received from Alan, the Boy Scouts, and our lawyer, who refused to let us face this fight alone. I'm proud of Kathy, who stood by me every step of the way. As a final act of closure, Kathy and I took a long overdue vacation. We packed our bags, locked the house, and left behind the memories of stress and conflict to embrace the freedom we had fought so hard to protect.